The more government tries to lower prices, the higher they go. If that sounds backwards to you, you're not alone. It sounds backwards to most Americans. It sounds backwards to most politicians. It certainly sounded backwards to me before I encountered Milton Friedman's price theory. But here's what makes this paradox so disturbing. You're watching it happen right now. Cities with the strictest rent controls have the most expensive housing. States with the most aggressive minimum wage laws have the highest youth unemployment. Countries that impose the toughest price ceilings on pharmaceuticals create the longest waiting lists for medicines. The very policies designed to make things affordable make them scarce, expensive, or both. How is this possible? Is the universe just perversely designed to punish good intentions? Friedman spent 50 years demonstrating something more uncomfortable than cosmic injustice. The paradox isn't in reality, it's in our thinking. We're using the wrong framework to understand how markets actually work. We're like someone trying to navigate with a map that has north and south reversed. Every step we take in what seems like the right direction takes us further from our destination. You felt this confusion, haven't you? You've wondered why your grocery bill keeps climbing despite government promises to fight inflation. You've questioned why housing becomes less affordable the more politicians pledge to fix it. You sense that something fundamental doesn't add up in the economic explanations you're given. You're not crazy. The explanations are wrong because the framework is wrong. Friedman developed a different framework, price theory, that resolved these paradoxes with stunning clarity. It's not complicated. It doesn't require a PhD. What it requires is learning to see markets the way they actually function rather than the way we wish they functioned. And that's exactly what this episode teaches you. How to apply Friedman's price theory step by step to the real markets you encounter every day. Not as abstract theory, but as a practical diagnostic tool. By the end, you'll be able to look at any market, housing, labor, healthcare, energy, and predict what policies will help and which will harm. You'll understand the paradox, and you'll never be confused again. I know you're exhausted by economic gaslighting. You're told inflation is transitory, then it's Putin's fault, then it's corporate greed. Meanwhile, your paycheck buys less and your savings evaporate. You're searching for a framework that makes sense of this chaos. Friedman offers exactly that, a systematic method to understand what's really happening in any market. Not political spin, not wishful thinking. The actual mechanics of how prices form, what they communicate, and why interfering with them creates the opposite of intended results. Why did Friedman have this answer? Because he spent decades testing theory against evidence, making predictions, and watching them come true. Stagflation in the 1970s, welfare dependency, the consequences of monetary manipulation. His framework works because it describes reality. Here's what you're about to discover. The 5-step method Friedman used to analyze any market applied to situations you face right now. If you want to develop this kind of economic clarity and stop being a victim of policy consequences, subscribe to this channel where we explore thinkers who cut through confusion with systematic truth. Before you can apply Friedman's framework, you need to understand what he discovered that everyone else missed. Prices aren't just numbers on tags. They're information systems more sophisticated than any computer network. Let me show you what I mean with something that happened to me last month. I was at the grocery store and I noticed chicken prices had jumped 40%. My immediate reaction, the same as yours probably, was anger, corporate greed. I thought, somebody's ripping me off. But then I remembered Friedman's first principle of price theory. Prices are signals, not obstacles. That higher chicken price wasn't primarily designed to hurt me. It was communicating information across a vast, complex system. What information? Maybe avian flu reduced chicken supply. Maybe feed costs spiked. Maybe a processing plant closed. I didn't need to know which. The price told me everything I needed to know. Chicken is scarcer relative to demand right now. And here's what fascinated Friedman. That single price communicated the scarcity simultaneously to millions of people making independent decisions. Restaurants adjusted menus. Shoppers bought pork instead. Farmers increased chicken production. Nobody coordinated this. Nobody planned it. The price coordinated it automatically. You know what this is like? It's like every price is a cell in a massive nervous system. When you stub your toe, pain signals travel instantly to your brain, and you adjust your behavior immediately. You don't step there again. You don't need to understand neurology. The pain signal contains all the information you need to protect yourself. Prices work exactly the same way in the economic body. Scarcity creates a pain signal, higher price, and millions of people adjust immediately to protect themselves and respond to scarcity. It's spontaneous order, millions of strangers cooperating without anyone in charge, just like language organizing itself without a department of words. Friedman observed this in his research on consumption functions. He noticed people didn't just respond to current income. They adjusted consumption based on expected permanent income, responding to price signals about their long-term prospects. This was revolutionary because Keynesian theory assumed people were mechanical, predictable. Friedman proved people are sophisticated processors of price information. The first step in applying price theory is training yourself to ask, what information is this price communicating? Not, is this price fair? Not, who's to blame for this price? But, what scarcity or abundance does this price signal? Try it right now in your mind. Gas is $4.50 a gallon in your area. What's the signal? Either crude oil is scarcer, supply problem, or demand for driving is higher, demand problem, or refining capacity is constrained, bottleneck problem, or some combination. The exact price integrates thousands of factors you couldn't possibly calculate, and you don't need to. The price does the calculating for you. This is why Friedman spent so much energy fighting the notion that prices are arbitrary or manipulable without consequences. In his debates, and I've watched dozens of them, he repeatedly demonstrated that interfering with price signals is like jamming a radio frequency. You don't eliminate the underlying reality. You just prevent people from receiving accurate information about it. Here comes the really interesting part. Once you see prices as information, you immediately understand why price controls are catastrophic. They're not just ineffective. They're literally cutting the communication lines in the economic nervous system. Imagine if your doctor said, you have chronic pain in your knee, but I don't like pain, so I'm going to sever the nerve so you can't feel it. Would that fix your knee? No. You just lack the signal telling you something's wrong, and you damage it further without realizing. That's exactly what happens when government sets maximum prices below market clearing levels or minimum prices above them. The underlying scarcity or surplus doesn't disappear. People just lose the signal that would help them respond appropriately. Friedman proved this empirically again and again. Rent control creating housing shortages, minimum wage creating unemployment, price ceilings creating black markets. Every single time. Step 1 mastered. Before analyzing any market, identify what information current prices are communicating about supply, demand, and scarcity. Now that you understand prices as signals, step 2 is understand the machinery that generates those signals, the interaction of supply and demand. I thought I understood supply and demand before I studied Friedman deeply. More demand, higher prices. More supply, lower prices. Easy. But Friedman revealed something subtle that changes everything. Supply and demand aren't fixed forces pushing against each other like teams in tug of war. They're dynamic responses to each other, constantly adjusting, creating what he called equilibrium-seeking behavior. Let me make this tangible with the housing market, something every American is painfully familiar with right now. Housing prices in Austin, Texas tripled in 5 years. Standard analysis says demand increased because people moved there, so prices went up, supply and demand. Correct, but incomplete. Here's what Friedman would add. Why didn't supply increase to meet demand? This is the diagnostic question that separates Friedman's framework from superficial analysis. In a functioning market, high prices are supposed to signal producers to increase supply. That's how the system self-corrects. If chicken prices spike, farmers breed more chickens. If housing prices spike, Builders should construct more houses. The high price creates the profit incentive to solve the scarcity. So why didn't that happen in Austin? Friedman would investigate barriers to supply response. And what do you find? Zoning laws restricting density, permitting processes taking years, environmental regulations adding costs, height restrictions, parking minimums, an entire regulatory framework blocking the natural supply response to high prices. The demand increase was real, but the supply couldn't respond because government policies froze in place. Result? Prices skyrocket. Young families priced out, homelessness increases, and politicians blame corporate greed instead of their own policies blocking supply. Notice how this works in reality. Friedman's framework directs your attention to the constraint. Not is there demand, but what's preventing supply from responding to demand? You can apply this exact methodology to any market you're analyzing. Labor market has high unemployment. Don't just observe supply of workers exceeds demand for workers. Ask, what's preventing wages from adjusting downward to clear the market? Often the answer is minimum wage laws or union contracts, price floors that prevent equilibrium. Pharmaceutical market has drug shortages. Don't just observe demand exceeds supply at current prices. Ask, what's preventing prices from rising to signal more production? Often the answer is price controls or insurance structures that hide true costs from consumers. Friedman tested this framework relentlessly. In his studies of monetary policy, he demonstrated how the Fed's interest rate manipulations, price controls on money itself, created boom-bust cycles. When the Fed artificially lowered interest rates below natural market rates, it signaled abundant capital that didn't actually exist. Malinvestment followed, housing bubbles, dot-com bubbles, then the crash when reality reasserted itself. Here's what I find absolutely fascinating. Friedman's analysis predicted the 2008 financial crisis 40 years before it happened. In the 1960s, he warned that government housing policies and artificially low interest rates would create unsustainable bubbles. Everyone dismissed him. Then 2008 proved him right, exactly the mechanisms he described. Why was he right? Because he understood the machinery. He knew that when you manipulate prices, including interest rates, you don't change underlying supply and demand. You just create a temporary illusion that eventually collides catastrophically with reality. The key insight for step 2 is this. Supply and demand want to reach equilibrium. If they're not reaching it, something is blocking them. Your job is to identify the blockage. When you watch news about housing crisis or labor shortage or inflation, immediately ask, what's preventing supply and demand from equilibrating? What's blocking the price signal from generating the appropriate response? 9 times out of 10, the answer is government intervention. Rent control prevents housing supply response. Licensing requirements prevent labor supply response. Money printing distorts all price signals simultaneously. Friedman's empirical studies confirm this pattern across industries, across countries, across decades. The data doesn't lie. When markets are free to adjust, they solve scarcity problems. When government blocks adjustments, scarcity persists or worsens. Step 2 mastered. Analyze whether supply can respond to demand, and identify any barriers blocking equilibrium. This is where Friedman's framework becomes genuinely powerful. And this is where you transform from passive observer to active predictor. Step 3 teaches you to forecast what policies will do before they're implemented. Friedman famously said, one of the great mistakes is to judge policies and programs by their intentions rather than their results. But he went further. He developed a systematic method to predict results before they occurred. Let me show you how this works with a real-time example, rent control. Politicians in several major cities are currently proposing or expanding rent control. They announce, we're going to cap rent increases at 3% per year to keep housing affordable for working families. Sounds compassionate, right? Before Friedman, you'd have to wait years to see the results. But with his framework, you can predict consequences now with near certainty. Here's the systematic prediction method Friedman used. First, Identify what the policy actually does to prices. Rent control sets a legal maximum price below what market clearing price would be. It's a price ceiling. Second, predict supply-side response. If landlords can't charge market rates, what happens to their incentive to maintain buildings? It declines. What happens to their incentive to build new rental housing? It disappears. Why would you invest millions in construction if government can cap your returns arbitrarily? Third, predict demand-side response. If rent is artificially cheap, what happens to demand for rental housing? It increases. People who might have bought homes stay in rentals longer. People who might have roommates get their own places. People from outside the city move and attracted by cheap rent. Fourth, predict a collision. Supply decreases. Demand increases. What happens when supply decreases and demand increases simultaneously? Shortage. Severe shortage. Fifth, predict secondary effects. How do people get apartments when there's a shortage but prices can't rise? Non-price rationing, wait lists, discrimination, bribes, black markets. Deteriorating quality. Why maintain buildings if you can't raise rent? Political allocation. Who you know matters more than what you can pay. You see how this works? You don't need to wait for results. You're applying logical deduction based on how incentives work. And here's what makes Friedman's method so powerful. He made these exact predictions about rent control in 1946. Then he watched them come true in New York, San Francisco, Stockholm. Every city that implemented strict rent control experienced exactly the predicted consequences. Housing shortages, deteriorating buildings, black markets, decades-long wait lists. When Swedish economist Assar Lindbeck said, "Rent control is the most efficient technique presently known to destroy a city," except for bombing, he was confirming Friedman's predictions with evidence. Wait till you see how you can apply this to current policy debates. Student loan forgiveness being proposed? Apply the framework. First, policy reduces effective price of education to zero for borrowers. Second, what's supply response? Universities have no incentive to reduce costs. In fact, they can raise them knowing government absorbs them. Third, demand response. More students take bigger loans for more expensive degrees. Fourth, the collision. Education costs skyrocket while quality declines. Fifth, secondary effects. Students make worse decisions. No price signal about degree value. Taxpayers bear costs. Moral hazard creates expectation of future bailouts. Friedman didn't analyze student loans specifically. They weren't significant in his era. But his framework predicts their trajectory perfectly. And what happened? Exactly what the framework predicts. Government intervention in student loans, making them non-dischargeable, expanding availability, remove price signals, and costs increased 400% while educational quality declined. The predictive power is extraordinary once you internalize the method. You watch a politician propose affordable housing mandates, requiring developers to include below-market units, and you instantly predict fewer total units built because you've made development less profitable at the margin. You don't need years of data. You've got framework. If this predictive capacity excites you as much as it does me, hit like so more people discover they can see economic consequences before they happen. Friedman used this method to predict stagflation in the 1970s when Keynesian economists swore it was impossible. He predicted welfare dependency when Great Society architects promised it would reduce poverty. He predicted monetary inflation consequences when Fed chairmen denied them. Step 3 mastered. Apply systematic logical deduction to predict policy consequences based on how people respond to change incentives and altered price signals. Friedman wasn't just a theorist. He was an empiricist who insisted on testing predictions against data. Step 4 is learning to evaluate whether theories actually match observed reality. This is what separates genuine science from ideology. Here's where Friedman's methodology gets beautifully rigorous. Any economic theory that can't make testable predictions is just philosophy. And any prediction that contradicts evidence must be rejected, no matter how elegant the theory. Let me show you how he applied this standard to one of the most important debates in economic history, the Phillips curve. In the 1960s, economic establishment consensus held that unemployment and inflation had a stable inverse relationship. Lower unemployment meant higher inflation. Lower inflation meant higher unemployment. You could choose your preferred point on the curve, but you couldn't escape the trade-off. Every major economics textbook taught this. Every central bank used it to guide policy. It was settled science. Friedman looked at the theory and said, "This contradicts basic price theory. Let me make a testable prediction. If government tries to reduce unemployment below the natural rate by inflating the money supply, people will adjust their expectations. Short term, you might reduce unemployment, but long term, you'll get inflation without the unemployment reduction, stagflation." The economics profession scoffed. Impossible. The data shows a stable curve. Then the 1970s happened exactly as Friedman predicted. High inflation and high unemployment simultaneously. Stagflation. The Phillips curve collapsed spectacularly. Notice what Friedman did. He didn't just have an opinion. He made a specific, falsifiable prediction. Then reality tested it. He was right. The consensus was wrong. This is a standard you need to apply to evaluate any economic claim. Does it make testable predictions? What does evidence show? You're watching this play out right now with minimum wage debates. Proponents claim raising minimum wage doesn't reduce employment. They cite certain studies showing minimal effects in specific cases. Friedman's framework predicts employment reduction, especially among low-skilled workers, young workers, minorities, exactly the groups minimum wage is supposed to help. So what does broader evidence show? You look at long-term employment rates for Black teenagers. Before federal minimum wage increases in the late 1940s and 1950s, Black teenage employment rates were similar to white teenage rates. After minimum wage increases priced low-productivity workers out of the market, Black teenage unemployment skyrocketed and never recovered. The gap persists today. You look at Seattle's $15 minimum wage experiment. University of Washington researchers found hours reduced for low-wage workers, resulting in net income decrease. Exactly what Friedman's framework predicted. You look across countries and time periods. The pattern confirms. Higher minimum wages correlate with higher youth unemployment, particularly in populations with lower average skills. The evidence supports Friedman's framework. But here's what I find genuinely illuminating. He taught us how to evaluate evidence properly. Not all studies are equal. Some cherry-pick time periods. Some ignore secondary effects. Some measure the wrong variables. Friedman's empirical rigor meant looking at multiple data sources, long time horizons, different populations, and natural experiments. When he studied monetary policy, he didn't just look at one country in one decade. He examined monetary history across centuries and continents. When he studied consumption patterns, he gathered data from multiple recessions, different income groups, various economic conditions. This comprehensive approach revealed patterns that narrow studies missed, and the patterns consistently validated his theoretical framework. When you let prices work, markets clear efficiently. When you interfere with prices, you create distortions and unintended consequences. Here's your practical application. When someone claims studies show some policy works, apply Friedman's empirical standards. Is the study looking at long-term or just short-term effects? Does it account for all affected populations or cherry-pick favorable subgroups? Does it measure actual outcomes people care about or intermediate variables? Is there contrary evidence being ignored? Does the theoretical mechanism make sense given price theory? I apply this constantly now. Someone claims rent control works because San Francisco study shows tenant satisfaction. I ask, does it measure housing availability for people not lucky enough to have controlled apartments? Does it count people who can't move to the city because no housing exists? Does it measure building maintenance quality over time? Invariably, the narrow study misses crucial effects that broader analysis catches. Step 4 mastered. Evaluate economic claims by checking predictions against comprehensive, long-term evidence across multiple contexts. Now we bring all together. You've learned that prices are information signals. You've learned to analyze supply-demand machinery. You've learned to predict policy consequences. You've learned to test against evidence. Step 5 is applying this complete framework to markets you encounter every single day. Let's do this with inflation, the economic reality crushing Americans right now. You go to the grocery store. Eggs cost $6 a dozen. Butter costs $8 a pound. Your grocery bill is double what it was 3 years ago. Politicians tell you it's corporate greed or supply chain issues or Putin's fault. Apply Friedman's framework. What do you discover? Step 1. Read the price signal. Prices across the board rising simultaneously signals general currency devaluation, not specific supply problems. If chicken were scarce but beef abundant, chicken prices would rise relative to beef. But when everything rises together, eggs, butter, chicken, beef, vegetables, the common factor is a measuring stick: dollars, not the goods themselves. Step 2. Analyze supply and demand. Did the supply of all goods simultaneously decrease? No. Did demand for all goods simultaneously increase? Not dramatically. What changed? Money supply increased 40% in 2 years, 2020 to 2022. More dollars chasing similar goods equals inflation. Classic monetary phenomenon, exactly as Friedman demonstrated throughout his career. Step 3. Predict consequences. Government spending financed by money printing will continue inflating prices. If Federal Reserve raises interest rates to combat inflation, recession follows as investments made during easy money period become unsustainable. Stagflation risk increases. The exact scenario Friedman predicted in the 1970s. Step 4. Check evidence. What happened in 1970s after similar monetary expansion? Stagflation. What happened in Weimar Germany after massive money printing? Hyperinflation. What happened in Zimbabwe, Argentina, Venezuela after central bank monetization of debt? Currency collapse. Evidence consistently confirms. Inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon, as Friedman proved empirically. Step 5. Protect yourself. If inflation is monetary and likely to persist, you adjust behavior. Fixed-rate debt becomes advantageous. You repay and devalue dollars. Cash savings are disadvantaged, losing purchasing power. Hard assets and skills gain relative value. You make employment and investment decisions based on real returns, not nominal. See how the framework transforms you from confused victim to informed actor? Let's apply it to another market. Healthcare costs spiraling out of control. Politicians propose Medicare for all to solve the crisis. Apply the framework. Price signal. Healthcare costs rising faster than general inflation indicate specific supply constraint or demand distortion, not general monetary problem. Supply and demand analysis. What constrains healthcare supply? Licensing requirements limiting doctors. Certificate of need laws limiting hospitals. Patent protections limiting drug competition. Insurance third-party payment hiding price signals from consumers. You don't know or care what doctor visit costs because insurance pays. FDA regulations limiting treatment options. Prediction. Adding more government funding, Medicare for all, without removing supply constraints will increase demand while supply remains fixed. Result. Either prices skyrocket further or government imposes price controls leading to shortages, rationing, waiting lists. Exactly what happens in single-payer systems worldwide. Evidence check. Compare outcomes. Singapore's mostly private system delivers better results at fraction of cost of government-heavy systems. Prior to massive government intervention, Medicare/Medicaid in 1965, healthcare consumed 5% of GDP. After intervention, it's 18% and rising. Each intervention promised cost reduction. Each delivered cost explosion. Evidence confirms government intervention is the problem, not the solution. Application. Advocate for policies that increase supply, deregulate licensing, remove certificate of need laws, allow price transparency, expand competition. Protect yourself by using health savings accounts, price shopping for procedures, building health resilience. The framework works every single time. Labor markets, energy markets, education markets, housing markets. You apply the 5 steps, and clarity emerges from confusion. Friedman spent 50 years perfecting and proving this methodology. He debated it with smartest economists of his era. He tested it against historical data. He made public predictions that came true. The framework is battle-tested and evidence confirmed. And now you have it. You're not an economist, but you can think like one, specifically like one of the greatest economists who ever lived. Step 5 mastered. Apply the complete framework to any current market, reading signals, analyzing mechanisms, predicting outcomes, checking evidence, and acting accordingly. You started this episode watching a paradox. The more government tries to lower prices, the higher they go. That paradox isn't resolved by accepting absurdity. It's resolved by understanding the machinery. Prices are information signals coordinating millions of independent actors. When you interfere with signals, you don't eliminate underlying reality. You just blind people to it, making problems worse. Supply and demand seek equilibrium. Barriers to adjustment create persistent shortages and surpluses. Policies have predictable consequences based on how they alter incentives and price signals. Evidence across time and geography confirms these patterns with stunning consistency. That's Friedman's price theory in synthesis. Not complicated, not requiring PhD-level mathematics. Just clear thinking about how humans actually respond to incentives, information, and constraints. And here's what changes everything. You now see markets differently than 95% of people. When politicians propose rent control, you immediately know it will create housing shortages. You don't need to wait for results. When they promise inflation is transitory, you check money supply and know they're wrong. When they blame corporate greed for rising prices, you identify the actual monetary or regulatory causes. You're not smarter than everyone else. You just have a better framework. You're using an accurate map, while others navigate with superstition and wishful thinking. Friedman gave you something invaluable: intellectual independence from political manipulation. You can analyze economic claims yourself. You can predict policy consequences yourself. You can protect your family's economic interests yourself. The confusion you felt about inflation, housing costs, healthcare prices, labor markets, it's gone. Replaced by clarity. You understand what's happening and why. You know what policies will help and which will harm. You can articulate this to others without sounding heartless, because you're not opposing good intentions. You're pointing out mechanical realities. That $6 carton of eggs isn't mysterious anymore. You see the monetary expansion that devalued the dollar. The $500,000 starter home isn't inexplicable. You see the zoning laws that constrain supply. The job posting requiring bachelor's degree for entry-level position isn't random. You see the credential inflation created by subsidized student loans. Everything makes sense now, not because reality changed, because your framework for understanding it upgraded from folk economics to rigorous price theory. Friedman spent his career testing this framework against every economic challenge of the 20th century. It held up under every test, and now it's yours. From now on, when you encounter economic confusion, news about inflation, policy debates about minimum wage, arguments about healthcare, you apply the 5-step framework automatically. First, what are current prices signaling about scarcity, abundance, or monetary conditions? Second, what's preventing supply and demand from equilibrating? What barriers exist to adjustment? Third, what consequences can I predict based on how this policy changes incentives and price signals? Fourth, what does comprehensive evidence across time and context show about similar policies? Fifth, how do I adjust my personal economic decisions based on this analysis? You don't need to be perfect. You just need to ask better questions, and the average person accepts surface narratives. In the coming weeks, practice this framework on markets you interact with. Grocery shopping? Ask what price changes signal. Job hunting? Analyze why wages are what they are in your field. Apartment searching? Identify supply constraints driving costs. You'll discover the framework works every single time, not because Friedman was infallible, but because he described how markets actually function rather than how we wish they functioned. And when you doubt, when political rhetoric is compelling, and you wonder if maybe this time is different, remember Friedman's empirical track record. He predicted stagflation when Keynesian consensus swore it was impossible. He predicted welfare dependency when Great Society promised poverty elimination. He predicted monetary inflation consequences when central bankers denied them. His framework was right then. It's right now, because human nature doesn't change. Incentives don't change. The laws of supply and demand don't change. Master these 5 steps, and you'll never be economically confused again. You'll protect your wealth by anticipating policy consequences. You'll make better decisions because you understand real costs. You'll defend freedom effectively because you can articulate why markets work and interventions fail. The framework is simple. The results are transformative. There's a phrase from Friedman I can't forget. There is no such thing as a free lunch. Do you feel the weight of that truth? Do you recognize how it changes everything? Every policy has costs. Every intervention has trade-offs. Every price control creates consequences. The question is never whether to pay. The question is how transparently and efficiently we pay. Friedman's price theory doesn't promise easy answers. It promises truthful answers. It promises that if you apply rigorous thinking to economic questions, you'll understand reality rather than comforting illusions. Imagine your life 6 months after applying this framework consistently. You won't be perfect. Friedman never promised perfection, but you'll be economically literate in a society drowning in economic ignorance. You'll make decisions protecting your family, while neighbors make decisions harming theirs because they trust politicians over principles. You'll see policy consequences before they devastate communities. And when inflation spikes or regulations backfire, you'll know exactly why. This channel exists to discover together the wisdom of thinkers like Milton Friedman. People who face the same policy debates, the same economic confusions, the same political temptations we face today, and develop frameworks that reveal truth. Subscribe if you want to continue this journey of economic clarity. In the next video, we'll discover how Friedman's analysis of the Great Depression destroys everything you were taught in school, and why that matters for today's economic challenges. See you there. And meanwhile, may you judge policies by their results, not their intentions.